Claim they like riding, but I know that they ain't. Ride or die. I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.
Go talk. Entertain me.
Oh, what?
James is the
What was that
champion
thing that
of
James said
that position.
that was close.
No, he made a
It was closer.
he made a
than
whole
Matt.
room of trying to say how
Right.
silly atheists are yesterday.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that already.
Yeah, so go. Entertain.
Hi. Sorry, I was having supper. I was cooking supper. I was cooking a steak and some fat, and I'm very particular about how I like my steak and fat. So I
course.
couldn't leave. So I'm just pouring myself a glass of wine here, and I can talk for a little bit. Is he
What-
still around? Is Matt still here? I don't see him.
No, Matt.
No,
Matt,
he has the option to come up anytime he wants, and he's not doing
Oh,
it. So
is he listening? Is he there?
he's listening. Well, I mean, he's in the audience.
Okay. All right.
And he just said, for the record, I will be commonly quoting this in the future. His misunderstanding of what you said. Yeah, Matt is very dense. He seems like a troll, but I think it's accidental. I think he just is clueless. And I hate for you to waste your time, or at least too much time.
Well, no, that's okay. I don't mind. And when I first joined, Jack said he had a question for me that I think was related to it, but I was.
Well, I was just wondering why it is you're familiar with when Craig says that presuppositionalism rests on a logical howler, the fallacy of begging the question. I assume what he has in mind is something like that. Take something like the tag argument as it's usually presented, right? It's something like knowledge and intelligibility can exist if and only if the Christian God exists. Knowledge and intelligibility exists, therefore the Christian God exists, right? And it just seems like we accept the premise of that argument, who didn't already accept the conclusion of that argument.
Yeah, well, I mean, the tag argument that presented that way is question begging, and no self-respecting atheist is going to just abide by that first premise. And I think I actually mentioned something to that effect when I was talking to Matt. I was saying, look, you're making this if this is supposed to be your presupposition, that's supposed to be your conclusion, right? That you can't account for things like rationality and free will and subjectivity and beauty and truth and the rules of logic and morality and all that stuff without first assuming that there's a God, right? I mean, you have to argue your way to that, right? You can use that as a premise in an argument, and that's not going to do any good if you don't. But I mean, presuppositionalism isn't just tag. I mean, the tag argument, right? A transcendental argument.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair. But I mean,
Okay.
you're also aware that this idea of virtuous circularity is like
It's
all
junk.
throughout people like Johnson and Van
Yeah.
Til.
Yeah. I think it's junk. I mean, I think that
No,
people
I'm
who
sure we
who
agree
argue
that
for
it's
the idea
junk.
of
I'm sure we agree on that. I'm just saying that there is kind of
okay.
like an issue of circularity that comes through in a lot of presuppositionalist apologetics.
Yeah. Well, a lot of presuppositionalists, I think, have had to confront the charge of circularity, and so they've tried to carve out a kind of circularity that is somehow legitimate and not subject to dismissal. Right? I don't think there's any such. I don't think there's a good argument for that. At least nothing that I've read by them.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we agree on that.
Okay. So now I missed the part where Matt first joined and was saying that I said something that reflected a change in my opinion on the matter or something like that, or was inconsistent with what all of you were saying. I didn't hear that part of the discussion. I joined later. So can someone bring me up to speed on what he thinks I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know if you're remembering the conversation yesterday, but it doesn't seem like that I'm understanding what Matt's trying to say or what you're trying to clarify.
Well, I heard the quote where he was quoting me, and I would stand by that. But and I'm not sure what he's misunderstanding there. I mean, I made a point. I'm sure it was with him. I'm sure. Correct. Others who were there will correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember telling him, if you want to say, like if someone says, this is my presupposition, I'm presupposing this, okay? A person can't say, well, what's your justification, right? Because if they're presupposing it, they're granting that they don't have a justification, right? But that doesn't, as I said to him, and I think these were my exact words, calling something a presupposition isn't a get out of justification free card, right? You can't just say, oh, I call this, I declare this a presupposition, and now I can't be challenged on it.
Oh,
Look,
that's the issue. You did agree that if I tell you it's a presupposition that I have, and we agree that presuppositions are necessary, and by
right?
definition, a presupposition does not have justification, it does put you in a part or a standpoint of being a lunatic to ask for something that's not within that definition. Like, presupposition is not to give justification for it. Now, later on, you can discuss and see, is anything around you pointing to that presupposition being true, but you can't ask evidence for that presupposition. That's when you said that atheists who do that are ludicrous, or something to
Okay.
that effect.
Okay. So when someone says, this is my presupposition, they are conceding they don't have a justification. So asking them for a justification is perverse. However, if they insist that you have to accept their argument or recognize the validity of their argument or the soundness of their argument, then they're being as big an idiot, because now they're treating their declaration that something is a presupposition as somehow immunizing them against having to have a justification for it. They're conceding they don't have a justification for it, okay? But that doesn't mean that anybody else has to respect that and accept that presupposition.
You would agree there's a difference between valid and sound. And if I
Mm-hmm.
give you,
of course,
a philosophical argument and I say that, does this logically follow? I
mm-hmm.
think that you can say, yes, given how you're using that, your presupposition, it's good, but we're distinguishing, is it valid and sound? I think that's where you can put an argument. But if you say that once you've granted the premises, that all of a sudden you're going to declare that something can't be valid or sound with a presupposition, then I think you have a more dangerous philosophical position.
Well, the difficulty here is, for the presuppositionalist, is that they're arguing with people, trying to prove the existence of a God. Now, of course, if their argument isn't sound, who gives a damn if it's valid, right? I can create a valid argument right now where all of the premises are false and the conclusion is false, and who cares? No one's impressed by the fact that it's a valid argument, right? A implies A is a valid argument, right? If pigs can fly, then pigs can fly. Okay, great, right? But no one's impressed with that argument, right? So
Yeah,
if an argument, wait, hang on a second. And I'm not saying that that's what presuppositionalism is doing, but my point is simply validity. No one should be impressed with validity. Validity is a minimal condition, right? When you're trying to persuade someone of the truth of the conclusion on the basis of a valid argument, you've got to get them to buy into your premises. Now, if you say, I have this premise, and the other person says, this premise that you're calling a presupposition that you say you must presuppose, I need an argument for why that must be presupposed, right? I'm not asking you to prove that this thing is true. I'm asking you to tell me why I ought presuppose it. And I explained that yesterday at some length. And I don't know, maybe Matt missed that part. What's that?
And that's when they get into truth. Is there an absolute truth? And I think that we would have to agree that there are some absolutes, like X can't be X and not X on the same time, unless you're opening up your worldview to true contradictions, which I don't believe you are. So that's why they're saying that the requirement of having something is out of necessity. Now, what that something is this is their presupposition. But I think that there's no further criticism.
I just don't think that they get anywhere by declaring something to be a presupposition. I've specifically given examples and arguments for why I think some things are legitimate presuppositions or properly basic beliefs or whatever. But there are some things I think can be rationally placed or classed under the heading of presuppositions, right? the claim that God exists and has, whatever unspecified properties are necessary to explain logic, truth, beauty, morality, whatever. I don't think there's any reason to think that the existence of God has to be presupposed. In fact, I don't believe for a second when presuppositionalists say they presuppose God. I just don't buy that. I think that's just nonsense. I think that this really is a kind of artifice. I don't think they presuppose God, and I don't think they're getting to their conclusion on the basis of that presupposition even. So that's why I think the argument's not even circular. It's not even circular in that the sort of the lunk-headed sense that some atheists think it must be circular.
Yeah, I'm still not clear on your position, though.
Okay, so my position is this. There are some things that we call presuppositions that ought to be called presuppositions. That is, these are things that we take for granted, that we assume. Okay? So, for instance, the distinction between truth and falsity. Okay? I think that's a primitive notion, right? It's very hard to analyze, and nobody has to be taught this concept, right? No one has to be taught the concept that there are causes and effects. We learn the words cause and effect, but everyone, including my parrot, recognizes and distinguishes causes from effects. We come equipped with that. Our trust in deduction and in something like modus ponens or something like that, or disjunctive syllogism. We just seem to have the intuitions that cause us to assume the veracity and applicability of these inference rules. We don't have to be taught to use induction. We just come equipped. We don't have to be taught that there are other minds. We don't have to taught that there's a mind-independent reality. We just come into the world believing this stuff. Now, is it true? Okay, well, the thing with these presuppositions is not just that they're universal. It's not just that you weren't taught them. It's that they're all ingredients to rationality and reasonableness to such a degree that when you deny them, it manifests itself to everyone as a kind of irrationality and possibly even madness, right? And there's no defending them except on pain of circularity, right? And because there's no defending them except on pain of circularity, like you can't defend modus ponens. What are you going to use to defend modus ponens? You don't have anything as good as modus ponens or better than modus ponens, right? And if you use modus ponens to defend modus ponens, you're arguing in a circle, and that's an invalid. What's that? It's a valid form of argument, but it's a fallacy, right? So because there's no defending these things that I've listed, and there's a whole bunch more, these beliefs are irrevisable. Okay, so they're unstated assumptions. They're universally held. They're ingredients in rationality. There's no defending them except on pain of circularity, and they're irrevisable. These things that I'm listing, I think, are properly understood as presuppositions, as pre-rational assumptions. These are the ladder that you stand on to arrive at your other beliefs rationally. But we don't arrive at these beliefs, right? There's no arriving at these beliefs. We start with this. This really is a starting point. This is an epistemological foundation on which we stand that we've inherited, thank goodness, and we're able to reason to our other beliefs. Wait, hang on. But this, I think, this is what I mean by a presupposition. And now when people say, oh yeah, but belief in the existence of God is a presupposition, I don't buy that. It doesn't seem to satisfy any conditions that would require us to take that particular belief and take it out of the realm of just metaphysical beliefs that you might have but could dispense with, and put it under the heading of things that must be presupposed. So if a person says, this is my presupposition, look, I can't ask them how they arrive at the veracity of that. I can't ask them to justify the content of the presupposition, but I can ask them, why the hell are you making that and classing that under the heading of a presupposition? It seems to me to be an arbitrary thing that you're declaring to be a presupposition, and you're not just declaring that you have to believe it, you're saying that everyone must, and it's on pain of some kind of contradiction or conflict in your worldview that you don't, and that needs an argument. In other words, I'm not asking you to defend the content of the presupposition. I'm not asking you to defend the claim that God exists. I'm asking you to defend the claim that it ought to be a presupposition. What, sorry?
because you've made like several points kind of all over the place for about
Go ahead.
3
Yep.
minutes now. So I think that you're actually creating for yourself two different definitions of presupposition. You're creating a presupposition without any justification, and then you're creating a presupposition that somehow requires justification. And I think that you have the X and not X in your second definition. When you're doing a presupposition, you're saying to the best of what I'm seeing, this is what I believe. Now, if you're looking at presuppositions based on what's self-evident, when you mean self-evident, do you mean self-evident to the majority? Do you mean self-evident to a minority? Because if that's your standard, majority of the world's population believe that a God exists, which means that for somebody to presuppose the existence of God, even on both of your definitions, it's a rational presupposition. And so then you can formulate your argument from that and see, does your presupposition work in the grand scheme of things? But for you to ask for further justification on the presupposition is just ludicrous.
Okay. I don't think there's any equivocation on my part on presupposition. What I'm saying is not everything is a presupposition because you declare it to be so. And it has nothing to do with self-evidence. None of the things that I listed as that I think are properly basic or that are sort of ingredients in rationality, none of them are self-evident, right? You can deny any of them without contradiction, right? It would be nice if we could just appeal to self-evidence, right? If denying them entailed a contradiction or something like that, right? But that's not the case, right? You can deny the existence of other minds. You can deny the existence of a mind-independent reality. You can deny that logic always obtains. You can deny the reliability of induction, the reliability of your senses, and the reliability of your memory, and on and on and on. All of these things are deniable, right? They're not self-evident truths. I'm not suggesting for a moment that these are self-evident, and that's the ground for distinguishing between what ought to be classed as presuppositions and what isn't. I manifestly deny that. I've always affirmed the problem with this is that these are faith claims, and we wish they weren't faith claims, but this is just I mean, if you're a good critical thinker and a skeptic, you should be able to say, when we reason within the scope of certain assumptions that are themselves not justifiable, not just unjustified, but I suspect they're unjustifiable.
Can I read you a definition to see if we're on the same page of what a presupposition is?
Well, we're talking about philosophical presuppositions. I don't think unless you're going to a dictionary of philosophy, I don't think you're going to find anything in a dictionary of vernacular English that's going to help. But go ahead.
I think that this is pretty good. It's a thing tactically assumed beforehand at the beginning of a line of argument or course of action. So in that, I'm taking that as there is no justification. This is my assumption at the beginning part of the argument. Now you can later on see if my presupposition holds weight as I further expand upon how that necessitates and interacting with reality. But you cannot, under any circumstance, demand any justification from the person's presupposition.
That definition that you gave doesn't distinguish between a premise, an axiom, or a presupposition. When we talk about presuppositions, I think we're talking about something much deeper than a mere axiom, right? If I say this is my axiom, you can say, yeah, I don't buy that axiom, right? I can trot out the axioms in geometry, and you can call them into question, right? There's nothing wrong. I'm not begging the question, right? But if I say, well, this is a presupposition, you can say, well, wait, if it's a presupposition, if you really are presupposing this, okay, and there's no justification by your own lights behind it, then it would be perverse of me to insist that you provide a justification for that which you admit up front you don't have a justification, especially if you think, as I do, that not only do I not have a justification, there's not going to be one forthcoming, right? They're not just unjustified; they're unjustifiable. I would submit. So when a person has an argument and they have certain assumptions, you can ask them, wait, why are you assuming that? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illicit with that. But when a person says something's a presupposition, it's a concession that they don't have a justification. But what you can ask is, wait a minute, why the heck are you presupposing that? Why are you saying that you can't justify this? It seems to me that the God belief is just one other belief, one other sort of extravagant metaphysical belief that you have, and you're trying to insulate it from challenge and a demand for warrant or justification on the basis that you've declared it to be a presupposition. It's not a get out of justification free card. The person can't insist
This
that
is
you
where you
justify it, but they don't have to respect your choice. They can just say, yeah, I think that's bullshit. The claim that
this is where we
God is that intelligibility necessitates a God, that needs an argument. And if you want to say, oh, but I don't have an argument, okay, fine, thanks for playing. You know, you can screw off now. I'm unimpressed. I'm not convinced. And if your
this
proof
is
of God
where
rests on this, I won't accept it.
this is
I
where
don't
you
have to accept what you don't justify. I don't have
no,
to accept it.
you don't have to. I'm not saying you have to accept somebody's presuppositions. That's putting words in my mouth. And if you get hostile, I'll get hostile back. I just
Whoa,
want to
whoa, whoa. We're
clarify that,
allowed to get
Ozzy.
heated
Because
we're allowed to get heated in a discussion, okay?
I'm just
And
saying is that
there's no hostility here, okay?
I'm just saying is that if you start jabbing more, I'm going to jab more too. I'm just giving clarification on that.
That's
I don't
fine.
want to do that. I think that we've had good conversations. But the moment in any conversation somebody is saying this is a presupposition and you then turn around and ask them for justification, you are being ludicrous.
That's true. I've conceded that, right? In fact, I don't concede that. I insist on that. If a person says, this is my presupposition, you can't ask them for a justification. But you can ask them for is, why are you making this your presupposition? It seems to me it's just another belief. So there must be a reason why you're classing this proposition that God exists under the heading of presupposition as opposed to classing it under the head of any old premise on the basis of any old belief. Why are you immunizing it? Why are you trying to immunize it? Why are you thinking that it cannot be justified? When you call something a presupposition, I presuppose, as most people would, that you think it has to be presupposed and there's no defense of it. Well, then why should I accept it if I don't already accept it? Now, the things that I listed, I think people would agree with, right? And I think I've given reasons why we class the things why I class the things as presuppositions that I do under the heading of presuppositions.
Now, presupposition is different than whether or not my presupposition works through my further argumentation. So, like if I
That's true. That's
presuppose
true.
that
Yeah.
a unicorn is going to come up tomorrow when the sun comes up. Now, when I start building, now, granted, we've both agreed that it's really stupid to ask me for justification on that. Now, tomorrow, when I'm starting to explain to you as the sun comes up, and you see that, hey, his presupposition is just not working out at all, then you can ask, why this presupposition and not another presupposition. That's a fair question, but that's later on in the argumentation. So when an atheist comes into a presuppositional apologist rooms and asks them, what is the necessity and grounding that God is the necessity of all intelligibility and facts? They're presups. They presuppose that. You're going to have to get much further in the argumentation than addressing their presup. And that's been the big point.
I'm not sure I understand that. Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure I followed
So
that.
the presuppositional Christian assumes off the get-go that there is a God behind everything. Reasonability, intelligibility, the laws of logic. Now that you can say that is a pretty big presupposition to start with, but that is their presupposition. So now when you come in the room, you're asking them to justify their presupposition. That's not going to get you anywhere.
I'm not asking them
You
to
have to ask
I'm not
them.
asking them to justify the presupposition. Let's be
I'm
clear
not
on this.
saying you. I'm saying if you have hypothetical and atheist
Oh, right.
going
Yes.
in a room and asking them that, then
Yep.
it's ludicrous, right?
Yep. No, I agree. Because the person's already
So
conceded that they don't have a justification. So it's perverse to ask them for a justification that they said
yeah,
they can't
so
give at the outset.
Yep, and if you keep doing it over and over again, that's the definition of insanity. So what you have to do is to go into the room and see how their worldview flows from their presuppositions. And I think that's what Matt was trying to point out. And I think that that's what these guys were saying that you didn't agree with yesterday.
Wait, what didn't I agree with yesterday? I'm not sure. What did I not agree with yesterday?
No, that you agreed with. So I think that that the issue has been whether or not you agreed that asking somebody for justification on their presupposition was ludicrous, and you agreed with me today that it was. And you
Mm-hmm.
also agreed with me if you go into a room and you ask a theist to justify his presupposition that God is the grounding for all intelligibility, given that they are a presuppositional apologist, and all that is presupposed that that is ludicrous, and you agreed to that as well. They were saying that you did not agree to that, and that's where we
No,
are now.
no.
There's a
Oh,
mistake that's being made here. Let me explain what it is. James thinks that these presuppositionalists, like Darth Dawkins, would say that their presupposition is unjustified and that they're not rendering tag, which is not the case.
There's no way. There's no way. Like any of these people would justify would say that their belief in God is, or the proposition God exists is unjustified. There's no way.
Well, yeah, that's probably
Yeah,
also
that's
true.
not my claim. My
But
claim
James, I
is
think
that if you are a rational
the
being looking
disagreement
on
though.
it, well, one quick second,
Yeah, go ahead.
that if you're a rational being looking at it from the outside, you would want to uh, do logic properly. So you would not want to ask them for a justification on the presupposition because you're a rational enough being to know that they're not trying to give you any justification at that point.
If
Yep.
they are, they are giving it. So the tag is it's a justification that God exists. So how can they be presupposing God if they have an argument for it?
Ozzy actually kind of explained that also.
Well, tag and presupposition are two different things.
They are.
all right, folks. I gotta bow out again. I got stuff I need to do here. But anyway, thanks, James. Thanks. That was a good conversation.
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.